I seen the videos that were just heartbreaking. I'm a mother. I have sisters. I have been in situations where this could have been me, in my younger years where, females were after me about guys and guys were playing both sides, things like that. So, I cried about it from the first day that I seen it, you know, and especially, seeing her mother, her sisters, and what was the icing on the cake for me was when I seen her son at the funeral, and he kind of like, like he just couldn't take it. And I'm just like, no, I have children, and my children love me, and it just brings chills to me. So I have been following this story since it first happened, the first day, the first morning. But also, I've seen like different content creators' pages, but I was familiar with your page. That's what made me contact you because it was just like, like I was so happy and excited the day when she was incarcerated. Like for real, on December the 3rd, I was just like, yes, this was something like it crushed my heart to know that happened to that girl and her family and her son. So, I was fully aware of who she is, who her family is, like, the pose. I've been following this story since day one. So when, I knew I had to go for like a traffic like violation, missing court, I knew that I would end up where she was at. So I don't know. I just felt it. But I knew I was like maternity ward, medical, same thing. So that night when I got there, everyone was sleeping. So that morning when they were calling everyone for vitals or prenatal vitamins, they did say Johnson. And they was like, Johnson is refusing. So I was like, that has to be her. I just felt it. I just knew God, like I was like, I'm going to really watch her. So the unit that we were on, it was like maybe at the most 14 to 15 women. Most of them were pregnant. But in this first particular room, there was 5 women to the room, 3 Caucasian women, 1 Mexican, and it was Miss Johnson. She finally did come out after a while to get on the phone.
Welcome to Crime Scene Chronicles, where we just don't follow the crime. We explore the mind behind it. Subscribe and stay with us, because some truths are hidden deeper than you think.
On September 8, 2025, a 6-year-old boy stood outside his school in Chicago's South Loop and watched his mother drive away after dropping him off. Moments later, on that same block, Romeka Meeks Blackman was shot in the face. She was 31 years old. She was a nursing student. She was somebody's daughter, somebody's sister, and most of all, that little boy's mother. She died at Stroger Hospital a short time later, and in the years since, her case has become one of the most talked about, most argued over criminal cases in Chicago. Not just because of what happened on that sidewalk, but because of everything that's happened in the courtroom and online ever since. Tonight, we're going to walk through what's actually been confirmed about this case, the charges, the court proceedings, the legal arguments on both sides, and we're also going to talk honestly about something else, the flood of unverified jailhouse rumor and speculation that has surrounded this case since almost the beginning, and why responsible true crime coverage has an obligation not to repeat it as if it were fact. Because Romeka deserves better than a story built on gossip, and so frankly does everyone else connected to this case, including the woman awaiting trial for killing her. If this is your first time with us, welcome to Crime Scene Chronicle Crime, where we follow real cases the way they actually deserve to be followed. If that's what you're here for, hit like, subscribe to Crime Scene Chronicle Crime, and turn on notifications, because this case is still active, and there's more to come as it develops. Let's start with who Romeka Meeks Blackman actually was. because it's far too easy, in a case that's generated this much noise, for the victim to become an afterthought in someone else's story. She was working toward a nursing degree, building the kind of career that would let her support herself and her son on her own terms. People who knew her describe her as joyful and full of energy, someone who loved to dance, who filled her social media with the small, ordinary highlights of being a young mother trying to build something better for her child. On the morning she died, she was doing the most unremarkable thing imaginable, the school drop-off, the daily handoff every working parent makes without a second thought about whether it might be the last one they ever get. That's what makes this case land so hard for so many people who never knew her personally. There's nothing exotic or complicated about the setting of her death. It happened in the most ordinary 5 minutes of an ordinary morning. Here's what's actually been established by police and prosecutors about what happened next. Following the school drop-off, Romeka became involved in a physical altercation with a woman named Kwadaja Johnson, who goes by Holly. The two women were connected through a man named Carlos Smith, with whom both of them shared children. According to investigators, after the initial altercation, Johnson walked back to her own vehicle, retrieved a handgun, returned, and fired multiple shots, one of which struck Romeka in the face. Prosecutors have further alleged that Johnson fist-bumped Smith in the immediate aftermath, before Romeka was rushed to the hospital, where she was later pronounced dead. That is the account laid out in court filings and confirmed through multiple news outlets covering the case. It's important to state plainly that certain details of what happened before and during that altercation remain legally contested, and we'll walk through exactly how in a moment. But the sequence of the shooting itself has been consistently reported based on witness statements and video evidence reviewed by investigators. In the immediate aftermath, something happened that confused and angered a great many people following this case, and it's worth understanding exactly what occurred because it shaped the entire year that followed. Kwadaja Johnson was taken into custody at the scene, and then, without being formally charged, she was released. For nearly 3 months, that fact alone became the center of enormous public frustration. Romeka's family publicly questioned why charges hadn't come immediately. Community members organized, demanded transparency, and pushed for updates that weren't coming fast enough for a family in mourning. It's worth understanding, even while sharing in that frustration, why this kind of delay isn't automatically evidence of negligence. In cases involving a claimed self-defense justification, prosecutors often take real time to gather forensic evidence, secure and cross-check witness statements, and build a case methodical enough to actually survive scrutiny at trial, rather than filing charges quickly and risking a weak prosecution that could ultimately fail. Whatever the reasoning, the practical effect was the same. A woman who had admitted firing the fatal shots lived her daily life uncharged for months, while a grieving family waited and a community grew increasingly frustrated with a process they couldn't see the inside of. Then, on December 4, 2025, the Cook County State's Attorney's Office announced that Kwadaja Johnson had been formally charged with first-degree murder. Prosecutors stated directly that the evidence did not support her claim of self-defense. She was taken back into custody, and a judge initially ordered her held without bail. Let's talk honestly about that self-defense claim, because it's central to understanding the actual legal shape of this case, and it deserves more care than either she clearly murdered her in cold blood or she was defending herself as competing slogans. According to Johnson's defense attorneys, she had previously filed an order of protection against Romeka, alleging that Romeka had threatened her through phone calls, text messages, and even through family members. The defenses claimed Romeka specifically threatened Johnson's grandmother, saying she intended to kill Johnson. The defense has also emphasized that Johnson was pregnant at the time of the shooting, using that fact to argue she felt an acute, specific fear for her own safety and her unborn child's. Prosecutors have pushed back hard against that self-defense framing, and their counter-arguments are specific rather than merely rhetorical. According to court filings, Johnson had never actually met Romeka in person before the morning of the shooting, despite having filed that protective order against her. Prosecutors have also emphasized the sequence recorded by witnesses and partially captured on video. After an initial physical altercation, Johnson walked away, retrieved a firearm from her own vehicle, and then returned before firing. That sequence matters enormously in the eyes of the law, because self-defense claims typically depend on responding to an immediate, ongoing threat. Walking away, arming yourself, and then returning to the confrontation is a legally distinct scenario from firing in the middle of an uninterrupted physical struggle. And it's very likely why prosecutors felt confident enough to bring the most serious charge available, rather than something lesser. In January 2026, prosecutors added 5 additional charges against Johnson. Court documents cited by local reporters allege that after retrieving the handgun, Johnson fired multiple shots at Romeka and then fist-bumped Carlos Smith before Romeka was rushed to the hospital. If that detail holds up as described, it's a difficult one for any self-defense narrative to sit comfortably alongside. And it likely explains why the state's attorney's office expanded rather than narrowed the case. Earlier this year, the case took another turn that reignited public frustration. After initially being denied pretrial release, Quadaja Johnson was granted release by a Cook County judge while she awaits trial. The conditions are significant: 24-hour electronic monitoring, surrender of her passport, surrender of her firearm owner's identification card, and a prohibition against leaving the state of Illinois. These aren't light restrictions. They reflect a judicial decision that release could be managed under close, continuous supervision.
But for Romeka's family and the community that has followed this case from the beginning,
The news that the woman charged with killing her was walking free again, even under strict monitoring, reopened a wound that had barely begun to close. It's worth pausing here to talk honestly about how genuinely difficult and legally complicated pretrial release decisions are, because this case has become something of a flashpoint in a much larger national conversation about bail reform and pretrial detention. A charge is not a conviction. Quadaja Johnson is under the law, presumed innocent until and unless a jury finds otherwise, and pretrial release decisions are supposed to weigh flight risk and danger to the community against that presumption of innocence, not function as a preview punishment before a verdict has been reached. Whether the specific conditions imposed here strike the right balance is a legitimate subject for public debate. What isn't legitimate is treating the fact of release itself as proof that the system has failed, when in reality, it reflects exactly how pretrial law is designed to function before a case has been fully tried. Now here's where we need to talk about something else entirely, something that has arguably shaped public perception of this case more than any actual court filing has. Since Johnson's arrest, an enormous amount of online content has circulated claiming to reveal what she's really like behind bars. Supposed accounts from a fellow inmate describing her behavior, her emotional state, her private conversations, her attitude toward Romeka's death. These accounts have been shared, debated, dramatized, and treated by large parts of the online true crime community as genuine insight into her guilt or her character. And it's worth being completely honest about what that kind of content actually is. Unverified, secondhand, anonymous hearsay about a woman who has not been convicted of anything. This isn't a small technical objection. It's actually one of the most well-documented problems in the entire history of wrongful convictions in the American legal system. Jailhouse informant testimony, statements from inmates claiming another inmate confessed or revealed incriminating details while incarcerated together, has been identified by legal researchers and organizations like the Innocence Project as one of the leading contributing factors in wrongful convictions overturned by DNA evidence nationwide. Inmates sometimes have real incentives to offer this kind of testimony, whether for reduced charges, favorable treatment, or simply attention. That doesn't mean every account from a cellmate is false. It means that responsible investigators and responsible commentators treat this kind of information with serious skepticism until it can be independently verified, rather than repeating it as though secondhand jailhouse gossip carries the same weight as sworn testimony or physical evidence. That standard matters here specifically because so much of the online conversation around this case has drifted away from the actual legal questions: the self-defense claim, the timeline, the additional charges, the pretrial release conditions, and towards speculation about Johnson's diet, her hygiene, her emotional affect, whether she's evil or mentally ill, whether she cried enough or smiled too much in a room full of strangers who were, by their own admission, watching her constantly and interpreting every gesture through the lens of a verdict they'd already reached in their own minds. None of that is evidence. none of it will be presented in a courtroom, because none of it can be verified, cross-examined, or tested the way actual evidence has to be. We're not going to spend this video repeating those claims, whatever they might be, because doing so wouldn't bring anyone closer to the truth. It would just add another layer of noise on top of a case that already has plenty. There's another person who's become impossible to separate from this story, and he deserves to be discussed with the same care. Carlos Smith, the father of both women's children. Public frustration around this case has, at various points, focused heavily on Smith's role. Questions about what he knew, what he may have said to either woman in the weeks before the shooting, and what his presence at the scene that morning actually meant. It's important to be precise. Carlos Smith has not been charged with any crime in connection with Romeka's death. A public petition has circulated calling for a fuller investigation into his alleged role and presence leading up to the shooting. And that petition is explicit that it is not declaring him guilty of anything, only asking for transparency about what has actually been reviewed. Smith has spoken publicly, briefly, saying that some of what witnesses have described doesn't match what he says actually happened. Beyond that, his role remains a matter of public question, rather than legal finding, and that distinction matters for a man who, like Johnson, is entitled to have accusations proven, rather than simply assumed because the internet has decided a narrative. Separately, unverified claims have also circulated online, alleging that a witness connected to this case felt threatened, with Smith's name attached to that speculation. We want to be direct about this. As of the most recent public reporting, this remains an unconfirmed claim, not an established fact, and no charges related to witness intimidation have been reported. Repeating an unverified accusation like that, as though it were confirmed wrongdoing, isn't journalism. It's exactly the kind of noise that makes a genuinely serious case harder for everyone, including the people trying to seek real accountability, to be taken seriously. What we can say with real confidence, without relying on a single unverified rumor, is this. Two women connected through the same man ended up in an escalating conflict that neither of them, by any account, was able to de-escalate before it turned fatal. Whatever the full truth of who threatened whom, whatever role Carlos Smith did or didn't play in that conflict, the outcome is not in dispute. A 6-year-old boy watched his mother drive away from school one ordinary morning and never saw her alive again. That's the detail that should outlast every argument about jailhouse phone calls and viral screenshots. A little boy, dressed for school, saying an unremarkable goodbye to his mother in what was for him just another Monday, and then within minutes his entire life changed in a way no 6-year-old should ever have to carry. Romeka's family has, by every account, tried to keep their focus fixed on exactly that. Not on the online arguments about Johnson's personality or her relationship with Smith, not on the competing content creators building entire channels and followings around dueling narratives, but on accountability and on preserving Romeka's memory as a real, specific person, a daughter, a sister, a nursing student, a mother, rather than as a headline permanently attached to someone else's trial. It's worth sitting with how strange and uncomfortable this particular corner of true crime content has become, because this case is a genuinely good example of it. A young woman is dead. A little boy no longer has his mother, and a significant portion of the public conversation happening online right now isn't really about either of those facts. It's about parasocial arguments over whether a woman awaiting trial seemed remorseful enough, in a room full of strangers who'd already made up their minds based on information that traces back to nothing more solid than an anonymous second-hand account. That's not accountability. It's a different kind of harm, layered directly on top of a tragedy that already didn't need any more weight added to it. As of the most recent reporting, Quadacia Johnson remains charged with first-degree murder, along with the additional charges added in January 2026, and she remains out on pretrial release under strict electronic monitoring while the case moves toward trial. No trial date has been publicly confirmed as of this telling. The case remains active, which means the fullest, most legally meaningful account of what happened on that September morning, the truth as it will actually be tested by evidence, cross-examination, and a jury, rather than argued about in comment sections and jailhouse rumor live streams, has not yet been delivered. What has already been delivered, permanently, is loss. A mother who will never see her son grow up, graduate, or come home from his own hard days needing her advice. A little boy who will spend the rest of his life carrying the memory of the last ordinary morning he had with her, whether he fully understands that yet or not. A family that has spent more than a year watching a legal process move at the deliberate, frustrating pace legal processes move at, while carrying a grief that doesn't operate on anyone's court calendar. If you've made it this far, we'd genuinely like to hear from you, grounded in what's actually been established tonight, not speculation. Do you think the legal process in this case has moved appropriately, given everything we've laid out? Let us know in the comments, respectfully, because real people are connected to every part of this story. If you want to follow this case as it continues to develop, because it is still active, and there will be real updates as it moves toward trial, make sure you like this video, subscribe to Crime Scene Chronicle Crime, and turn on notifications, so you're here the moment there's something genuinely new to report. We follow cases like this one, because families like Romeka's deserve to have her story told accurately, long after the initial headlines fade and the online noise moves on to the next thing. Before we close, it's worth remembering exactly who this story belongs to. Romeka Meeks Blackman was 31 years old. She was working toward a nursing degree so she could build a stable, independent future for herself and her son. She loved to dance. She filled her days with the ordinary, exhausting, rewarding work of raising a child on her own terms. On an ordinary Monday morning, she did the most ordinary thing a parent can do. She dropped her son off at school and told him to have a good day, and she never came home to him again. Whatever the courtroom ultimately determines about what happened next, that loss is permanent, and it deserves to be the center of this story, not a footnote to someone else's trial. This has been Crime Scene Chronicle Crime. We'll be back with more, as soon as there's more of the actual truth to tell.